So which is it? Does the president want to put the country first and heal wounds and unite, or be Trump, flame-throwing and divisive? The answer may be clear to you, but the president seems to be confused. Why? Well, 6 different times he's flip-flopped on the moral mandate raised by the ugliness in Charlottesville. Here are the facts. First response was Saturday the 12th.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
Now, the on many sides, mitigating moral monsters like the KKK was not liked. So 2 days later, those many sides were gone.
We must love each other, show affection for each other, and unite together in condemnation of hatred, bigotry, and violence.
But when pressed by reporters about his initial error, Trump did what he does most. He doubled down.
I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides.
Then, when his own party finally came out to beat back the president's divisiveness, Trump spoke of unity and said, "We owe it to the troops."
When we open our hearts to patriotism, there is no room for prejudice, no place for bigotry, and no tolerance for hate.
Just a day later, literally a day later, the country that the troops deserve gave way to the political reality that Trump wants, once again saying he did nothing wrong.
I hit him with neo-Nazi. I hit him with everything. I got the white supremacists, the neo-Nazi, I got them all in there. Let's see. Yeah, KKK, we have KKK.
Then, again, literally the next day, back on prompter, reading somebody else's words in Nevada, we heard this.
It is time to heal the wounds that divide us and to seek a new unity based on the common values that unite us.
What is the deal? Let's debate this with CNN political commentators. We've got Ana Navarro and Ben Ferguson. I mean, Ben, it's always nice to be standing. Good to see you. Good to see you. So, it seems obvious what's going on, okay? He believes what he says when he's with those crowds, okay? Antifa, KKK, they're both bad. And that's it. And you don't want to say it, but that's what he believes. And then every once in a while, somebody says, look, you're putting us in a hole. Say this. And he will literally be tied to the prompter. He doesn't even really move from screen to screen. That's how tied he is to somebody else's words. But it's clearly not where his head is on this issue right now. I mean, isn't that just a fair reckoning?
I disagree with you a little bit. I think there's different settings where you have different things that you can say. When you're talking to your base, you're going to have much more of a blunt conversation. He doesn't need a teleprompter then. If he's in his rally, which is a place that he loves and he feels like it's literally, that's probably one of his happiest places to be, he's going to be him. He's going to be Donald Trump. If he's going the next day and he's talking to a different group of people, whether it's the military or a more formal setting the day after that you saw yesterday with a teleprompter, I don't think it's fair to say those are not his words. He obviously goes over that. He goes over it with a speechwriter. Every president has somebody that writes for them. But if Donald Trump doesn't like it, he will go off that teleprompter and people criticize him for it.
And he does exactly that. 24 hours later, Anna, he says the message that's supposed to be given as presidential, and then he fights it. So it's not just the same as saying, I'm going to give one set of policy ideas to you because you're the Texan, and I'll give another one to you. Yes, politicians do that. This is about morality. This is about who is bad and who is good, or what is bad and what is good. It's not something like just selling different items to people.
And I think you just hit upon it. Look, if he was reading a teleprompter and then giving an off-the-cuff speech about policy, none of us expect Donald Trump to be Albert Einstein. None of us expect him to be a tenured professor at Harvard. We know he doesn't know policy. But this was a basic moral issue. This was about condemning white supremacy. This was about condemning hatred and racism. If you cannot have a consistent message on that, then you have a real problem. We are not asking him for consistency on details. We are asking him for consistency on right and wrong. And it's not only that he was inconsistent, it's that he was inconsistent over and over again. He said one thing on Saturday. He said another thing on Monday. He said another thing on Tuesday. He said another thing. You know, I mean, it is one day after the other. So this is very simple. It is the real Trump versus the scripted Trump. It is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
I don't think it's that. I think it's an issue of Donald trying to navigate and figure out exactly how to communicate, not as a candidate, not as Donald Trump, the guy who goes out there and connects with a lot of people that voted for him and made him president. I think he's trying to figure out exactly, sometimes you have to talk differently when you actually are the president of the United States of America. I think what he's learned this week or over the last week and a half is you got to get certain issues right every time. You got to have a clear and concise message. What he had the other night when he talked about the war in Afghanistan was very clear and concise. There was no ambiguity there. That's where I do think the president could probably learn from that night and go, that was a good night for the president, right? That was a night when people walked away and they said, I feel comfortable with this. I feel like he has an understanding of the issue. I think the president has to start doing that more often. I agree with you that you don't want to have, when you're walking out there, one thing that you say on a Tuesday that looks like it's different than what you said on a Wednesday. But I also think that Donald Trump should have the right to be Donald Trump and to not have everything. Some people, I think, focus in so much on certain little words and things. He cleared up when he was in his rally the other night. He didn't say both sides. Most people said he shouldn't ever have said both sides.
Actually, he did say it. He just said it in different words. When he said they are trying to take away our history, that's both sides. He is pitting American versus American with those words. And he lost the right to be divisive the day he became president of the United States of America. He is not the president of the divided states of America. He just lost the right to pit one American versus another the day he took that oath of office.
I think you can have a real conversation about people that become violent. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily a bad person. Like what we've done is we basically put the president in saying, you can only say this. You can't have a real conversation about this. We should be able, when we're watching on TV, people that are literally being violent, it is insane to imply that somehow the president shouldn't be able to talk about those people that are literally wearing a gas mask, throwing a canister of gas, throwing urine at police officers.
Ben, the only time he's getting a coherent message is when he's on teleprompter. You almost get the feeling that John Kelly is behind a curtain somewhere, operating a shot caller.
But also, he got elected by not being on a teleprompter.
Despite saying, crazy, incoherent things.
He got elected not being on teleprompter.
Lindsey Graham might have beat him if he was on teleprompter the whole time.
Or connecting with a base. There are a lot of good reasons, positive attributes that got him elected for the group of people that voted for him. There's no question about it. This is about something else. This isn't about how you do it. It's about what's in here and what's in here. You either think that Nazis and people fighting against Nazis are different on a moral basis,
sure,
or you don't. It's not about the violence. Violence is wrong. If you are violent when you protest, you're a rioter. You're not a protester. So whether it's Antifa or it's BLM or it's a white supremacist, when you commit a crime in the act of protest, you surrender the First Amendment right to a criminal violation. It was never an issue. It was that people like Heather Heyer, who were there to fight against white supremacy, were somehow equal to them because they both got violent. And you know that's not true because you condemned it.
Absolutely.
But you're also defending the president as if somehow this is about picking audiences and learning how to be president. No,
I don't
it's
think
about
it's that.
what is in your heart. You either think it's wrong or you don't.
Okay, here's what I'll say, though. I think there was many Americans that watched what was going on TV, and they literally were visually seeing people that were violent over here and violent over here. And there was a real conversation the next day about that, because when you watched it, you knew that there were people on both sides that were being violent. The problem is,
when the blacks were fighting against people with fire hoses in the 60s. No, hold on. Because the analogy is a specious analogy. I've heard it many times. When the blacks were fighting against the people with the fire hoses, were they morally equal? Were they morally equal?
I think you know the answer to that.
No is the answer. They were not morally equal. So when the white supremacist has the torch, and I get up in the white supremacist's face, and we start going at it, and there's a fight, are we morally equal?
No.
I'm fighting against
there's a right side and a wrong side.
And that's the part that doesn't make sense. And you said that in the aftermath.
And I said that, and I agree with it now. There's no, when you're the president of the United States of America, there are certain issues you have to always get right. The issue of race is definitely one of those. When you see someone hate, race, bigotry, whatever that may be in that category, you have to always get that issue right. I totally agree with you. At the same time, I do not think that there is a problem having a real conversation about the fact that there are certain people, I don't care, that show up at these events to become violent and to act as if there were people there that were not there solely to be violent.
Yeah, but
solely to have an
Ben,
explosion between
what
two
happened that
people. It's unfair.
Saturday at
People with
UVA
the
was
torches
not.
and the guns.
But listen, we cannot say that about the people that showed up, the very brave young students, UVA students who showed up to counter protest on Saturday. They didn't show up there to be violent. They
I
showed
agree
up
with
there
you
to
completely.
defend American values. And we have got to talk about just how reprehensible this speech, this rally speech in Arizona was. He spent minute after minute relitigating his response to Charlottesville. It was all about him. Then he is in Arizona. Just miles away is John McCain, a national hero who was hanging by his thumbs for 5 years while Donald Trump was getting 5 draft deferments, and he leads the chant against John McCain. He fosters an environment where people show up with signs that say John McCain is a traitor and John McCain should die. A man who's going through chemotherapy, a man who's fighting cancer right now. That is reprehensible. Then he says you versus ours when it comes to Americans. That is reprehensible. He gives a passing mention to Heather Heyer. That is reprehensible.
Final word.
I think the president, you know, I don't know if someone showed up and had a sign that said John McCain should die. If they do, that's reprehensible. It's wrong. Okay, then I'm saying it's wrong. John McCain is in politics. John McCain knows in politics you're going to have a vicious debate. I don't like, and I love John McCain. I really do. But John McCain, I think, understands that when you're in politics, it's going to get heated. And John McCain doesn't mind that. So let's not act like he's, you know, somehow not able to handle himself.
I'm sorry, but Donald Trump is not fit to say John McCain's name.
Look, you're allowed to have political fights, but it's about how you fight. About what the level of disagreement is. You don't like my policy, that's one thing. But you wouldn't insult my dead father. You wouldn't say that I'm not a hero because I got captured. You know, there's certain things that you do because it's about decency, and then there's politics, and they can go together. We're just seeing them get torn apart by this tribal politics. Ben, Anna, you did a good job. I thought we were going to go at it. I thought there was a plate of metal.
Yeah, and this is not from him.
I thought you were like Iron Mike Sharp from the old WWF days.
By the way, anybody comes after your father, I'm defending him too.
But no, it was everything. Allison.
Hey, Chris. Sending a message to the NFL why hundreds of protesters say quarterback Colin Kaepernick is being kept off the field. We have the latest for you.
Welcome back to The Lead. We have a lot to talk about today with our political panel. Folks, this new Quinnipiac poll that I just quoted shows 60% of the American people disapprove of the president's response to Charlottesville. And by a 2-to-1 margin, they say President Trump's doing more to divide the country than to unite the country. And it seems like last night, in keeping with this theme, he probably made matters worse. Can he turn this around, or is it just not in him?
Well, I think he can definitely turn it around because it's still pretty early in his administration. But the thing that always occurs to me when I see approval ratings like this is that they're not that different from the approval rating he had when he won the election in November. And so politics is fundamentally a relative sport. And even though the president's absolute numbers may not be that fantastic, if folks don't like the Democrats, he may still be able to survive and even thrive politically for the foreseeable future.
Do you agree?
Well, I think what we learned and under different circumstances is it's much harder to run for re-election than it is to run for office the first time, because people evaluate you on the job that you've done or haven't done.
It's harder to run for re-election?
It can be, because people are looking at you not as the aspirational force of I'm going to change all these things in the country. They're looking at you, did you get health care done, or did you repeal it? Did you bring all the jobs back, or didn't you? You have more of a record to run on. What was striking to me about his appearance last night, many things, but the most striking was his biggest problem is probably not, I don't think it is, his problem in his base. His base has stuck with him for the most part. It's not that soft. His problem is that the country feels, a big part of the country feels alienated. His problem is he doesn't have a big legislative record. So it's interesting to me, aside from the off-the-rails aspect of the speech, that he spent his time there. And he spent his time going there.
So there was a very strong response last night from former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. Let's run that.
I really question his ability to, his fitness to be in this office. I worry about, frankly, the access to the nuclear codes.
Now, Clapper worked for Obama, but he also worked for George W. Bush. He's generally not a partisan guy and fairly sober. That was a fairly staggering thing to say.
Yeah, and I think it's a recognition fact that this guy's outside the norm in a major way that we have not seen before. The problem for folks, and I think Clapper dubbed it a nightmare, the nightmare that he calls it, is that the American people duly elected President Trump, right? And we had an entire year-and-a-half discussion of whether he was fit to be president, and the American people decided that he was. And in fact, Hillary Clinton mounted this exact argument that Clapper is saying now against him, and it was ineffective. I think partly for the reason that I think one of these numbers is about him being level-headed. People didn't want somebody who was level-headed. The loss of faith in institutions had led them to a point where they said, no, let's just get this guy. Let's get the bully in there and see what happens. Now, you have seen some regret in different sectors, but you also have seen repeated polling that shows he would still beat Hillary Clinton. So I think there is a difference in how he's perceived here versus how he is perceived by regular voters out in the country. That does not mean, however, that his behavior is good.
I want to bring up this fascinating and stunning story from ESPN. They're pulling an announcer from University of Virginia's first home football game because his name is Robert Lee. That's him on the right. I don't think anybody would confuse him necessarily with the Confederate General Robert E. Lee on the left. Now, it sounds like an Onion headline, but it's not. This actually happened. Now, Yashar Ali of New York Magazine posted a response from an ESPN executive trying to explain that it wasn't because they were worried that having an announcer named Robert Lee would offend anybody, that they were worried that if they did that and he came to Charlottesville, that this young play-by-play guy would all of a sudden become subject to horrific memes, and he would become an object of ridicule, and that's not what they wanted, although ultimately that's what they ended up getting, Jen.
And then some. So, look, I think as I was watching this story, I felt for probably a mid-level PR person who was possibly a little overzealous in making this decision. Clearly, they got exactly the opposite of what they wanted. Somebody noted today that there are more than 11,000 Robert Lees in this country. They can all rest assured they're probably safe, especially now. So this was absurd by ESPN. Obviously, they should change it. I'm not sure if they have. It's given us all kind of a moment of lightness and otherwise a challenging time. So
People did unify against this ESPN decision.
Yeah.
Well, I think it also, I mean, it taps into this thing where Trump has an ability to say, look, like he does one crazy thing and he says, he counts on the other side going equally crazy, if not more so, to send the signal to both his voters and some middle-of-the-road voters that, like, wow, they really are kind of off the rails, and removing an Asian commentator named Robert Lee for fear, I think, frankly, let's be serious, of offending people. I'm just saying
what they said.
Their first statement did not say that.
Right, no, you're right.
New statement.
You're right.
I think it was because, and this is the scary part, people would have tweeted about it and said, I can't believe they didn't remove this guy.
Right.
I'm offended watching this game. It's just silliness all around, and I think Trump benefits from it when people go off the rails like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it shows that you can be so risk-averse about some of these cultural issues that you actually cause the very backlash that you were hoping to prevent in the first place. And the good thing about it is, I actually, when ESPN first announced this decision, I worried that I was going to be one of the only people who thought this was outrageous. It's good that there's this broad bipartisan consensus that this was really stupid. Yeah, ESPN has brought the country together in a way that our politics can't.
You know, it's also, I mean, one of the other things that's interesting about it is just the fact, obviously, he's an Asian American.
Right.
This is now a decision that is discriminating against a minority.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not as though Asian Americans are overrepresented in sportscasting.
Absolutely.
So, I mean,
Oops.
Exactly.
maybe this will help his career. Who
Well,
knows?
let's hope so. Let's hope he doesn't suffer from this, honestly, because he's a good play-by-play guy. Jen Psaki, Mary Catherine Ham, and J.D. Vance, thanks so much. A private shouting match between President Trump and the Senate Majority Leader becoming very public. Leader McConnell just responded. What did he say? That's next.
Okay, time for CNN Money Now. The next big test for Washington, the debt ceiling. The debate starts today. Start the clock for the government shutdown question. Chief business correspondent Christine Romans is in our Money Center with more. It never fails, the perennial debate.
Here it is. And it's called the X date, exactly when the government runs out of money. The latest target, early to mid-October. To avoid picking and choosing which bills to pay, lawmakers must raise the country's debt limit before then so the Treasury can pay America's bills in full and on time. Now, for months, the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin, has used special accounting tricks to stay under the debt ceiling. But the gimmicks tap out sometime between September 29th and mid-October. There are big consequences if Washington doesn't raise the ceiling in time. A downgrade for U.S. credit, federal employees and contractors wouldn't get paid, and world markets could tank. Now, that debt ceiling will be hit exactly as Congress needs to pass a spending measure to keep the government open. The president is now threatening a government shutdown if his border wall is not funded. By the way, the last shutdown cost the U.S. economy $24 billion. Chris?
Good to know, Christina. You know, and when they hold up those payments, it's the people who pay the price.
Oh,
Thank
absolutely.
you very much. So the streets outside the NFL offices in New York are filled with Colin Kaepernick supporters. Andy Scholes has more in the Bleacher Report. Kaepernick was, of course, the guy who started these protests in this most recent spate of not standing during the national anthem. What's the latest?
Well, Chris, you know, the NFL season kicks off 2 weeks from today, and Kaepernick remains without a team, and because of that, a number of civil rights groups organized a rally outside of the NFL's offices. Now, people were wearing Kaepernick jerseys and shirts with Kaepernick's face on them, and many believe Kaepernick is being blackballed by teams because of his social activism.
The NFL is 70% people of color. They need the black and brown community. So the blackball Colin Kaepernick, that's not in their best interest.
Obviously, the NFL thinks he's bad for business. Not yelling or screaming or being disrespectful. He's just bringing attention to a very important issue they have a problem with.
Organizers from the United We Stand rally requested a meeting with the NFL by September 7th to discuss methods to support and protect players who are socially active. And Allison, they say if they don't get that meeting, they will call for a boycott of the league and its sponsors.
Okay, Andy, we know you'll keep us up to speed on all of that. Thank you very much. So we all remember Elian Gonzalez and the day that he was taken forcibly from his home, a gun pointed at him in this infamous photo in this custody battle that gained international attention. Well, now, 17 years later, CNN goes one-on-one with Elian Gonzalez. That's next.
Welcome back to the lead. The world lead now, an unprecedented move in modern U.S. Navy history after the 4th major warship accident in Asia this year, and with the search still ongoing for American sailors perhaps lost at sea. After the USS John S. McCain, a Navy-guided missile destroyer, collided with an oil tanker east of Singapore, the Navy today announced that the commander of the 7th Fleet, the commander of all ships in the Western Pacific, has been relieved of duty. Joining me now is retired Navy Rear Admiral John Kirby. He's now a CNN military and diplomatic analyst. And Admiral, this is an extraordinary move. This doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. It's very, very unusual, Jake. In fact, Navy officials I've spoken to, they can't tell me the last time when they remember a fleet commander actually being relieved of duty. But what's really unusual, and you hit it in your opening, is, 4 navigation-related incidents in the same fleet over the last 8 months, 3 of them collisions, 2 of them now with lethal consequences. So I'm not actually surprised at all that the Navy did take this unusual step.
A defense and security analyst told CNN that one big question is whether naval operations in the Pacific are being stretched too thin. Is that a concern, especially with everything going on with North Korea?
Putting aside the individual circumstances here with the McCain, which they'll investigate, I think the answer to that is yes. Again, commanders I've talked to out there, they tell me the op tempo is very, very high. You have very tense situation up in the Northeast Asia with Korea, and you've got tensions in the South China Sea. The Navy is very stretched. And this is a Navy that has been trying to grow in size and has been frustrated in their ability to buy new ships and to maintain the ones they have out there. So yeah, I think when it comes down to it, when they look for the threads here, they may very well find that op-tempo has had a role to play.
There is, of course, also this question about whether or not there is any cyber intrusion or any sabotage. We're told that there's no evidence of that yet. But is that a possibility?
I can't rule it out, Jake. Is it a possibility that a ship's systems could be hacked? Yes. But I think in this case, it's a very, very remote possibility. Again, people I've talked to say while there's no indication, they also they're not taking it all that seriously. They don't really think that that's a factor here. What's more likely, and what we're hearing, is perhaps a steering casualty. Now, that would explain a lot. If she lost steering as she enters a traffic separation scheme in the Strait of Malacca, that could absolutely explain a little bit about what we happened here. And you can't hack into the steering system on a U.S. Navy destroyer. It's closed. It's not networked off the ship.
What should be done to prevent these types of accidents from happening in the future? Well,
I think exactly what Admiral Richardson's doing. One, call a comprehensive review across the entire Navy to see if training, certifications, procedures, watchstanding processes are being done properly. Number 2, do this operational pause. Take a day and listen to sailors. Find out what's on their, what are the stressors in their lives? Are they getting enough sleep? Are their leaders well qualified? Do they have the material readiness that they need. And then lastly, I think Congress needs to stand up here and quit the budget uncertainty that the services are under. They have all been saying now for 4 or 5 years with sequestration and continuing resolutions that uncertainty is causing them to make trade-offs in readiness issues that they don't want to have to make and they shouldn't have to make.
And let me just ask this question. The U.S. military has been carrying so much of a burden for the United States for more than a decade, 2 wars. Besides how up-tempo things are in the Pacific, and the wear and tear that might create when it comes to conditions physically and also emotionally and psychologically for sailors. Is the military just stretched too thin? Having been fighting these 2 wars, one since 2001 and another one since 2003.
I think it's a fair question, and I think to a degree, yes, they are. Now, look, you know, because you've been out there with them, Jake, they're the most resilient young men and women you're going to find.
They're the best.
They are the best. But to say that they haven't been stretched by these wars and the op-tempo around the world and the way the world's crashing in around us would be, I think, false. They are stretched. They are strained. And that's why they need some budget relief and, more importantly, budget certainty so that they can reset the force. For every ship you have overseas, you need 3 back home. One in deep maintenance, 1 recuperating from a deployment, and 1 getting ready to go. And what the Navy has had to do is kind of borrow from Peter to pay Paul in order to keep those 3 ships moving through that cycle. So it's a constant problem. It's not going to go away anytime soon. But yeah, I do think that being stretched a little too thin is going to prove to be a problem.
And that's just the Navy. We're not even talking about the Army or the Air Force.
Yes,
thank you so much, Admiral. Appreciate it. It inspired a Saturday Night Live sketch complete with the Welcome back to Lead. Continue with politics. That 70s funk band War asked it best, why can't we be friends? 2017, we're asking that about President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. We can think of a few reasons why they can't, but things have gotten really bad. Today, a senior White House official told CNN an in-person meeting between the 2 men is being scheduled as soon as Congress comes back after Labor Day. According to the New York Times, the 2 men are not even on speaking terms presently after a phone call 2 weeks ago in which President Trump gave McConnell a profanity-laced earful. And the next day, he followed that with an attack tweet. One of them read, "Can you believe that Mitch McConnell, who has screamed repeal and replace for 7 years, couldn't get it done, must repeal and replace Obamacare!" Exclamation point. Let's go to CNN's Manu Raju, who's right with me in studio. And Manu, the White House is arranging this meeting. It's telling about the fact that they need to work on this relationship.
Yeah, that's right. And right now, Mitch McConnell is trying to tamp things down. He realizes this is getting out of hand. Things have gotten incredibly testy, and these reports are just not helpful as they head into a very busy September session. McConnell just moments ago, Jake, putting out this statement saying we have a lot of work ahead of us and we are committed to advancing our shared agenda together. And anyone who suggests otherwise is clearly not part of the conversation. Now, I have had a chance to talk to a number of Republicans today who are perplexed that the president continues to go after McConnell, continues to go after Jeff Flake, the Arizona Republican senator, whose seat they need to keep in next year's elections, and is doing things to distract from their agenda. Now, one Republican senator who did not want to be named and talking very candidly about Trump said that these are distractions they said these are potential distractions that require more work to get members where we need to be to pass health care or tax reform. He said it's not helpful to keeping our members focused. These key promises that we have to fulfill. Republicans want, finally, Trump to get back on that.
And Manu, the president's been very outspoken, saying that he's upset about McConnell's failure, the Senate Republicans' failure to pass the repeal and replace of Obamacare. But as your reporting indicates, there's another big issue bubbling under the surface, and it's Russia.
It's a bigger issue for Trump, according to my sources who I've spoken with, said that the thing that really set off Trump in that August 9th phone call with McConnell was these Russia probes that were going on, and Trump saying that the majority leader needs to do more to protect him from those probes. In addition to that, the Russia sanctions bill that passed overwhelmingly in Congress and that Trump reluctantly signed into law, he was furious at that piece of legislation because it tied his hands, did not like the way it went about in Congress, blamed McConnell about that, and swears were dropped as well from Trump towards McConnell. Just shows how much work they have to do to move forward.
Of course, it is not the majority leader's job to protect President Trump on the Russia investigation. Manu Raju, thanks so much. And that, of course, brings us to Russia in our world lead as congressional committees are investigating Russia's involvement in the U.S. elections, interference thereof. CNN tracked down former Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak, in Russia. He was just replaced by a new diplomat this week. CNN's Matthew Chance specifically asked Kislyak about his contacts with members of the Trump team. And Matthew joins me now live from Saransk, Russia. And Matthew, did you get the sense from your conversation with Kislyak that he was trying to protect his conversations with the president or with any Trump associates?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, he definitely didn't want to see us here in Saransk in central Russia. He didn't want to talk to us, and he didn't want to disclose the contents of those meetings. I asked him about whether sanctions and the possibility of lifting U.S. sanctions was ever discussed with any member of the Trump administration or the Trump team, and he refused to comment on that. I asked him about these reports that have surfaced about Jared Kushner raising the possibility of unofficial back-channel communications through U.S. diplomatic properties in the United States with the Kremlin. He said it's not our policy to discuss conversations between two parties in that diplomatic situation. He also, of course, met Donald Trump himself back in May. I asked him about that as well. When you met Donald Trump, the president, were you surprised when he disclosed secret information to you about Syria?
I'm not sure that I heard anything that would be secret. But it was a good meeting, and we discussing things very important to your country.
What about this allegation you're a spy master, a spy recruiter?
Nonsense.
Did you attempt to recruit any members of the Trump administration?
You should be ashamed, because CNN is the company that keeps up pointing to this allegation. It's nonsense.
I also asked him about his ideas about the future of the US-Russia relationship, and he said it's going to be very difficult, not least because of the continuing sanctions and the fact that the authority for lifting those US sanctions on Russia has now been transferred from President Trump to the US Congress, Joe.
All right, Matthew Chance, thanks so much and good job. It appears to be an unprecedented move for the U.S. Navy coming up